Brilliant. Thank you. So thank you all for dialing in to our first 2022 event, where we are focusing on the NHS STP programme. So just a brief overview of who we are as Life Science Connexions. So we are a platform that aims to help life science students and graduates by hosting quarterly careers insights events. And this is where we invite professionals to share their career journey and also provide insight into their job roles. And we also shared internships, entry-level and junior roles on our social media pages. And we have different blog series that we run on our website, where we have professionals share a typical day in their life. We also have the interview diaries, where we have professionals share tips on how to interview well for their particular role. We also have Job of the Month, where we share a brief description of different job roles within the life science industry. And we also have a Q&A session with a professional, where we ask them particular questions that students or graduates may want to know. And so these are the different ways we use to try and help life science graduates and students. So we just have a brief overview of what healthcare science is, if you don't know, or if this is the first time you're being introduced to healthcare science. So healthcare science is a highly diverse scientific workforce that encompasses of 40+ areas of applied science. And this workforce support the diagnosis and the treatment of patients. And it's important not just for the delivery of current healthcare, but also for the development of the current of healthcare and medicine as well, and to improve treatment and also improve procedures within medicine. So there are 4 main divisions within healthcare science. We have the life science division, and this includes clinical biochemistry, clinical immunology, virology, microbiology, and the like. There's also physical science, which includes radiology, radiotherapy, clinical pharmaceutical science, physiological science, which includes audiology, ophthalmic and vision science, and critical care science, and bioinformatics, which includes applied epidemiology, genomics, and health informatics science. So that was just a brief overview of what healthcare science is. So today we have 3 speakers. We did have 4, but unfortunately, one of our speakers was not able to make it today. So we still have Katy Onions, and she's a first-year trainee in clinical biochemistry. So she's currently in the trainee scheme. And we have the second speaker is Elizabeth Faminu, and she is a clinical pharmaceutical quality practitioner, and she has completed the training program and has now ventured out and is working within clinical pharmaceutical quality. And we also have Jo Horne, and she is a STP Training Programme Director and Midlands Dean of Healthcare Science. So these we have amazing speakers here, as you can see, and we hope to gain as much information and tips as well on the application process, and even after you've completed the program, some tips on how you can actually use what you've learned within the program to progress within your chosen field. So we will start with our first speaker, and that's Katy. So we will share Katy's slides for her.
Thank you. So hi everyone, my name's Katy and I'm doing the STP in clinical biochemistry. and I'm in my first year. I started in September. So what is the STP? The STP is the Scientist Training Programme. It's a 3-year programme where you will be employed in an NHS trust, training to be a clinical scientist. So you'll be part of the trust and you'll learn on the job, and you'll complete an e-portfolio on a platform called OneFile, where you'll complete a range of different competencies related to different aspects of your work. So what is a clinical scientist? Well, there are clinical scientists in a range of different disciplines. So mine is clinical biochemistry, but there are loads more. So they work alongside different staff, such as laboratory staff and clinicians, to help prevent, diagnose, and monitor and treat disease, for instance, by interpreting laboratory results, which is a big part of a clinical biochemist's job. They can be involved in method development as well, and quality control, so developing techniques, and their work can be very varied. So to apply for the STP, you can apply via direct entry or in service. So direct entry is what I did, and it's if you're not already employed in an NHS trust and you just apply directly to the programme. Or the in-service route is if you're already employed in an NHS trust, for example, as a biomedical scientist. So if there's an opportunity going at your trust, you can apply in your discipline for the STP kind of internally. So as I said, it's a full-time job in an NHS trust, but you will also do a part-time master's. So the master's also spans the 3 years, and what you learn at uni will complement what you're doing in your role in the NHS. And it's split 80-20-ish for work and uni. So in the first year of the STP, you'll do rotations. So my discipline's biochemistry, but I also do rotations in hematology, immunology, and genetics in my first year. And so those are the modules I'm also doing at uni, so they kind of complement each other. And then in the last 2 years of the STP, you specialise in your discipline, and you will spend obviously more time in your discipline than anywhere else in the STP. And then at the end, you become eligible to register with the HCPC, that's the Health and Care Professions Council, to become a clinical scientist. Next slide, please. So I just thought this was quite a nice picture of how the STP is split. So you've got university doing your masters in your discipline. So it's fully funded. I think I forgot to mention that. And then the employer at your trust, and the work-based training and your assessments. Next slide, please. So just to give some of my background and why I chose biochemistry. So I did my degree in biomedical science with a placement year at Lancaster University, and I graduated in July. And I was eligible to register as a biomedical scientist because I'd done a placement year in the NHS, and I'd completed the IBMS registration portfolio. But I decided I wanted a more clinical job, so I applied for the STP and I was successful. So now I'm a trainee. So why did I choose biochemistry as my discipline? Well, at uni, I really enjoyed those sorts of modules, like the clinical biochemistry module, where we'd like look at case studies and kind of diagnose patients. And I really found it interesting, like the topics, writing the essays from like a clinical perspective. And I did my placement year between my 2nd and 4th year at uni. And at that point, I didn't know what discipline I wanted to go into. I just knew that I wanted to be some sort of scientist in an NHS lab. And I actually asked if I could do my placement in histology, because I knew it was more manual out of the disciplines rather than automated, which biochemistry is. And I loved the placement and I learned loads from it. But I decided that from a clinical perspective, I couldn't see myself doing histopathology in the long run. So I managed to get in touch with some people that worked in clinical biochemistry and kind of have a chat to them about what they did. And their work really appealed to me because it's very, very varied. And I find it interesting right from the pre-analytical stage right through to reporting the results. So do note that I didn't have any biochemistry experience really before applying to the STP. And to reflect on my experience so far, so I've been in the STP for 4 or 5 months and I'm really enjoying it so far. As I said, in the first year I do rotations in haematology, genetics and immunology. I'm meant to be in haematology now, but it's being pushed back a little bit because of COVID related things, but I'm really looking forward to starting that. So far I've been in different parts of biochemistry lab, learning like how things run in the lab, how things work, the different techniques that are used and how samples are analysed. And then I've been spending time with clinical scientists learning how to interpret those results that the lab have generated, which is super interesting. I love doing that. And although in clinical biochemistry we're non-patient facing, I kind of wanted to have an idea of how what we do in the lab affects the patient and kind of understand like where the samples are coming from and how the patients feel. So I arranged to go to some clinics and some ward rounds and some multidisciplinary team meetings. And they were really good, helped me understand kind of the process of it all and the impact it has on the patient. And then of course I've been doing my competencies for the online portfolio and different things for that, such as case-based discussions. And in October to November was my teaching block for uni. So it does differ with the specialisms, but for biochemistry and blood sciences, it's a 5-week teaching block in October in the first year. So you're kind of released from work, excuse me, and you do those like lectures and seminars for those 5 weeks, and then you go back to work. And at the moment I'm doing my uni exams and I've got some assignments coming up as well. But I'm really enjoying it so far. Next slide, please. So just a little bit on applications. So I've taken this image from the National School of Healthcare Sciences website. So it just gives an overview of the when the dates are for the applications. So this is for direct entry. So they opened on Tuesday and they close on the 1st of February. And then after that is a situational judgment test. So just a few general tips on the written application. So convey your passion. So if you want to do the STP and you're applying for the STP, you know how much you want to get onto the programme, but you need to let the reader know that as well. So if you can, try and make it interesting and try and make it stand out. So do your research and make it clear you know what is involved in the STP. Attend open days if you can, keep an eye on those, and webinars. I think there was one on Monday which has been recorded, so that will be really useful. And in these open days, ask good questions and make useful notes. If you can, use them wisely. Don't attempt the application in one sitting. It's not a good idea. Keep going back with fresh eyes and chipping away. And if you have a kind friend or family member that's willing to proofread your application, that's always great, because you do kind of go a bit, you know, you start missing things once you've been staring at it for that long. Read the specification well and use the STAR technique if you can. If you haven't heard of this, give it a Google because it's really good. It stands for describing the situation and the task the action that you did, and the result that you got from that. And lastly, a bit cheesy, but believe in yourself, because you can do it. And the worst that can happen is that you don't start the STP this year, but you will have a great foundation on an application when you next apply. But you know, somebody's got to get the post. Why can't it be you? Just go for it. Believe in yourself. Next slide, please. So this slide is just kind of a few general tips and some questions that I've been asked in the past, just to kind of give some encouragement, really. So I just like to disclaim that everything I've said today is from my experience, and not all departments have the same approach, and specialisms differ a bit, especially in terms of how uni works. So how did I choose my specialism? So I've gone over my experience of that, and my advice to you would be to try and get some experience if you can. But I appreciate that recently it's been really difficult to get experience because of COVID. And you can reflect on experiences that you have done, and reach out to people and ask about their specialism, because they'll be able to tell you better than anybody what it involves. And so do as much research as you can, and try and envision yourself doing it. What can you see yourself doing? What really interests and excites you? Also have a look at the curriculum library on the National Schools website. So they have a list of the competencies that different disciplines do. So that might give you quite a good idea of what's involved in that specialism. People say, oh, I haven't got enough experience. You don't need experience in your discipline, but obviously it's really, really good if you can get some. But I do appreciate, because of COVID, it's been really hard. And don't panic if you can't get any NHS or lab experience, because all experience is good, whatever it is. You will have developed some soft skills that you'll definitely be able to apply to the STP. Also, you're not expected to know absolutely everything about your discipline. Obviously, you'll need to know what it involves and have a good overview of what it is, but you're not expected to know in depth all the tests that they do, everything about it, because you'll be a trainee and you're there to learn. Some people are reluctant to apply because they think it's too competitive. And I also had this worry, and it is very competitive. But as I said, don't let it put you off, because somebody has to get the position. You've got as good a chance as anybody else, so you may as well apply. You don't need a master's or a PhD, although if you have them, that's great, and you can also apply if you have them. Do I have to move away? So that's up to you, really, and what sub-preferences you choose. So for me, I was willing to move away, but I understand that for various reasons, some people might need to stay close to home, which is completely understandable. So on the National Schools website, there is a list of posts available, so what's available where. So you can see for your discipline where's available, and your application is general, but then you can rank the hospitals in order of preference. And you don't have to include one if it's too far away. You don't have to rank that one. And how do you find out more information? So events like this are great. Open days, and the first port of call that I'd always direct you to is the website for the National School of Healthcare Science. There's tons of info on there, lots of frequently asked questions, and just a lot of information about the application. So always go there first. And also reach out to people on LinkedIn and social media if they're happy for you to do that, and try and get in touch with people like clinical scientists at hospitals if you can as well. If you have any questions after this talk that you think of, you can message me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm more than happy for you to do that and to answer any questions. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was really insightful and yeah, had a lot of key information and some really good tips as well. So thank you so much, Katie. So the next speaker we have is Elizabeth Faminu, and she is just going to be going through, sharing her experience, and she's completed the program and she's now working within the NHS. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Hello everyone. Like Ronke said, I'm Elizabeth. I'll just tell you a bit about my background. So I did biochemistry at the University of Hertfordshire, and in my final year I applied for the STP programme. I put biochemistry actually as my first choice and clinical pharmaceutical science as my second, but got into clinical pharmaceutical science for an interview and was successful, and based on the position in my interviews, the placement I got. So I ended up in Preston. So as a Londoner, that was a very big trip. However, I really enjoyed the 3 years there. There was definitely a lot of things that I learned whilst I was there. I think the STP program for me was a good transition into the working life that I'm now experiencing, as you are a trainee, but you are working and studying. So there is that balance that you have, whereas when you fully qualify, you are expected to be independent and not be second signed for things, for example. But yeah, I found the STP program to be a very good transition. One of the key things I'll be covering today is networking, because I feel like throughout my 3 years, that's probably one of the things. Initially, indirectly, I was doing a lot of, just because I wanted a good support team, because you will find that you may have to move whilst you are on the STP program. And so it's really important to have a support team to keep going, because there will be times where you will feel discouraged, or you feel very overwhelmed, or you feel very underqualified. And so it's good to have a support team there for you alongside your training officer, but other students as well. So I networked by going to a lot of events, for example, like ones like this, like online and in person before COVID. And a lot of them were linked with my specialism in particular. So there was quite a few conferences, and because when you do the STP program, you do get a budget, a training budget, so you can use that for conferences, or whilst you're at university, can use that to stay in a hotel or whatever. You basically do have, depending on who your training officer is and how happy they are with you to have autonomy over your budget, you can choose to attend quite a few conferences. I also went on quite a few placements, so I enjoy traveling. So I went Huddersfield, Liverpool, Manchester, back to London, and yeah, just through sending emails. I think in NHS, networking is a very big deal, and a lot of specialism, I think Kate probably say the same, especially in pharmacy, which is where I'm based. We're looking at standardizing and automating processes. So yeah, working together and collaborating is very important. So hospitals are very inviting, and they would love an extra pair of hands, or for someone to just look around. So I did do placements there. So yeah, I think the pros of networking and putting yourself out there is that you can get very good opportunities with your electives. People do go internationally, but I stayed in the UK, and I was able to get my elective opportunity through having a placement in Liverpool. And yeah, and its opportunity was presented to me, and that's how I was able to get my elective. Also with qualifying, getting a job, I managed to get a job in London because I'd done a placement before there previously, and they saw my work and they saw how I fitted into the team, and they were happy to let me know that if there's a post coming up and that I could apply like everyone else. So, you know, it is really, really good for job opportunities. And it also is good for getting a breadth of knowledge that you could bring back to your base, which they will really appreciate and encourage you even to go on more placements and to network further when you go to, for example, London, and see what they do in comparison to what we do up north. So yeah, that was really good. A con, or it could be a con, but still could be a pro, but it's, you do build a reputation for yourself, and it's very important that when you put yourself out there, you do represent your base hospital, you do also represent yourself. So again, you want to be very aware of the reputation that you're building for yourself, and it can be socially and physically draining to constantly be talking or engaging with people you don't know, putting yourself out there for strangers, but it does pay off. Lessons I learned when doing the STP course was to not stress over the competencies. They are a mountain initially, they're like a very big mountain, there's loads of them, and you just think, what can I do? But I think each day or week or month, let's chipping at them away, you will eventually get there. You will eventually get there. Organization is really important, but it's also important to have a balance, even though it is really hard to, but I think you have to be very intentional in blocking off space to do something you enjoy, because you will find that you do take work home. Obviously, it's the nature of the masters, but it's really important to have that break. And another tip I would say is to make use of opportunities and find creative ways to do competencies. For example, doing this webinar and presenting on this webinar can be a way of knocking out a competency. And to have fun, enjoy yourself. It's actually really fun, as Katie would say, even though there was a lot of learning to be done, the learning is actually really fun, and it's different to university where it's very theoretical. Here it's theoretical and practical, and you're also developing as a person and into that leadership role, hopefully when you qualify. So it's a great time. It's a very great time. Trying to think anything else that may have not covered. Oh, another thing. So I specialize in clinical pharmaceutical science. Like Katie, I didn't actually do pharmaceutical science as a degree. However, I showed interest in the fact that I organized placement in a hospital, or organized to speak to someone, especially because of COVID, may not be able to, but I showed interest by organizing this placement and going there and seeing what they do. And yeah, even though my title is clinical, funny enough, I'm not always patient facing. So do bear that in mind with some specialisms. They're actually not patient facing, and they have clinical pharmaceutical science has a different dynamic to it, in the sense that we don't specialize, which can have its con because you do have a lot of work throughout the 3 years, but it has its pros because I've worked, as I've qualified, I've worked in various specialisms, because I never really specialized during my course. And so that worked very well during COVID, where there weren't many job opportunities. I wasn't really restricted to a particular path, but later on, obviously I would love to be more specialized, but right now I can still branch and venture into different aspects of clinical pharmaceutical science. And that is all from me, guys. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for that insight. It was really informative, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners can take a lot away from that on how to maximize their experience within, if they were to be successful in getting into a program. So I hope you guys were able to get some tips down from there. So thanks, Elizabeth, again. And finally, we have Jo, and she is the STP Programme Director, and also Midlands Dean of Healthcare Science. So over to you, Jo.
Well, thank you very much. Can you all hear me all right? Sometimes my microphone's a bit funny on this computer. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. I haven't done the STP. I'm too old. Is the sad thing to share with you there. But I am a dual registered biomedical scientist and clinical scientist. And I started in the 90s. I did a biomedical science degree as well at Portsmouth. And I started in my hospital at Southampton in the late 90s as a trainee. And I qualified as a consultant a few years ago now. So I have made it from trainee biomedical scientist to consultant healthcare scientist. And my specialism is histopathology. And I've only ever worked in the same department, but in the last year or so, I decided it was time for change. And I've moved to the national school, which is fantastic. So I've been there for 4 months. It's gone really fast. It's really busy. It's an amazing group of people, about 50 odd of us. Yep, so next slide, if that's okay. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the school and what we do. I'm going to build on what Katy sort of said really in terms of applications, and hopefully just give you something that's useful, that isn't just what you can find on the website. And I'll come to that when I get there. So essentially our role in the school is to recruit people into our programmes, which includes the STP, which we're pretty busy with at the moment, as you can imagine. It's to assess people once they're in the programme, and it's to look after people while they're in the programme as well, and to get them out the other side. And you can imagine it's a very, very kind of big system and big process. And I've learned about this over the last few months. So there are numerous groups, you see those boxes there off the website of all the different teams within the school and lots of people working within those teams. And there's loads and loads of expertise, but every single person has that same shared value that we're here for people that are in our training programs. And amongst that, there's people like me. There are 5 training program directors for the scientist training program. And we also cover different areas of health education in England. And so it's a bit weird for me, and I'm kind of loving this new online kind of world, if I'm being honest, because you might notice from my accent, I don't particularly sound like I'm from the Birmingham area or the Midlands. I'm actually from Hampshire, and my home trust is in Hampshire, but I work in the Midlands on a daily basis, and that's really lovely for me. And there are training program directors that support trainees and healthcare science in general within each region in England. So there's a really nice support structure there for people now. Next slide. So if you want to do the STP, you probably know that you need an undergraduate honours degree or integrated masters. It needs to be a first or a 2-1. You don't get extra points if you've got a first. It's just like a threshold. If you've already got a master's in a relevant subject, then you can accept a 2-2. Evidence of research is desirable. I mean, obviously you'll have a project if you've done your undergraduate degree. The key thing, I've highlighted it in blue, is the ability to meet the working and travel requirements of the training role and clinical placements. And I think a thing to say as well is, you know, we've been talking about it in the school today, and the requirement that many trusts have now for trainees or employees of NHS to be double vaccinated, and that's something to really, really think about as well. But it's not just, you know, this current situation, it's also about being able to travel to university, which is often block release. For example, if you applied for one of the direct entry places that we've got on offer in my home department, in histopathology at Southampton, there's a little advert there, there's 2 places, then you'd have to travel to Manchester to do the MSc. So you'd have to be able to do that. And the majority of the training would be at my home trust, but actually sometimes you might have to go to another hospital in the locality to do other bits of training, depending on what the specialism is. And I think the key thing is to say that different roles might look for a particular skill set. There's generic skills that we all have, but for example, if you wanted to do genomic counselling, You know, that experience of working in a caring role and having that caring kind of personality is obviously really important. If you want to work in histopathology like me, attention to detail is really, really important. So it's not saying it's not important in other areas, but there are some where it's really important. So it's worth thinking about what you think your skills are and what actually your personality is as well. So for me, I'm quite shy, I'm quite reflective. I knew, even when I was at school, I knew I didn't want to work with patients on a day-to-day basis. So histopathology and pathology in general is fab for me because I've not seen a patient in 25 years of practice. I've done a lot for them, but I've never seen one. Next slide. So I think these are going to be shared afterwards. The top in the blue boxes, they're links, and they take you to this year's generic job description and person spec for the Scientist Training Programme. The one I've got on the screen, I left it on there because I quite like the way it's laid out, and the current one is not laid out in the same way. So essentially, when they're talking about different skills, this is what they mean. And I'm trying not to read the chat, but I did notice a question about physical requirements. And so that's what that means in that bottom right-hand corner. And this is 2019, so it might be updated. So for all of those things, it's really important to look at the job description and the person specification. And when you're doing a personal statement, when you apply, map it to those things. That's really, really important. Next slide. So some updates, just in case you've applied before or you want to know how it works. And I'm learning this alongside everybody else this year. So it's a 3-stage process, and this is for direct entry. So there's another version that Katie mentioned called in-service. So people who are already working in trust can go through that route. This is for people applying via the school website. So the first stage is long listing. So you apply, click on the website, it takes you to a thing called Oriel, which is where you apply. And then you get a link to a SJT or a situational judgment test. And there's a window of opportunity to do that, which is a few days, I think. You can apply for reasonable adjustments if you need more time. For example, if you had dyslexia, you might need more time to be able to complete it. And so you can ask for that if you need it. There are, I think I've got another slide about SJT, but I'll say it now. There are examples on the website where they run it where you can you can sort of test it out and practice before you actually do it. But I think I've got a slide on that. 2 is shortlisting. So if you get through those bits, what happens, your application score gets tagged to your location preference, and all the locations where the places that are being offered, they're all on the website. There's a clever algorithm that I don't understand. And what happens if that all works out, you get allocated to an interview with the employing department. And then step 3 is the interview, and that's online at the moment. And that's with a couple of scientists, usually from the employing department. And there may be a school representative on there. There's a couple of links at the bottom which take you straight to more information about this. Next slide. I thought I had another slide. Okay, so the application via Oriel, the situational judgment test, it's been updated this year. There were some problems last year. So we're now using Pearson VUE. When you do that, you have to sign a confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement, which basically says you're not going to discuss it with anybody. They'll then send you a link, and you've got this test window, and yeah, it's what, 8, 9, 10, 11, 4 days. You get 50 minutes, plus or minus reasonable adjustments. And there are sample questions, and there's a link to it on there, but you can find all of this through the website. The questions they're evidence-based questions, and they don't ask you questions about science, but they explore your values, your behaviours and professionalism. And essentially you answer the question based on what you would do in this situation if you were in a trainee position. There's another link there. Next slide. So shortlisting, you have this, the things go together, the score and the application, the algorithm does its thing, you get allocated to your interview. And there's also, if you're not top of the list, I think there's a pool of reserve applicants. And if one becomes available for whatever reason, then you could still be offered an interview. Next slide. In terms of the interview, so 2 scientists from the employing department, maybe someone from the school, and those invitations are made, they're called an offer, and they're made through Oriel. You can't hold an offer and wait for another one if your offer that you've been given is not your preferred site. And if you decline that offer, you leave the process for the year. If you're successful at the interview, you get offered a training post in that department. If you're unsuccessful at interview, you leave the process for that year and you have to start again the following year. Next slide. So what I thought I would do is, like, I was thinking, how can I make this useful for you? And the truth is, I've done 2 virtual interviews as an applicant this year, and I got both the jobs. So I thought, actually, what I'd do is I'd just talk about some things I've learned and some things I've done from, you know, I'm an examiner as well for my professional body, and I sort of interview people quite a lot. So I would say, you know, there will be virtual interviews, and things to think about are your environment. So find a quiet place with no distractions. If, like me, you've got a beautiful fur baby, give them some treats and shut them out of the room. She's currently downstairs asleep, but she made a few visits yesterday while I was doing a presentation, which was not helpful. And I interviewed someone recently, and you know, I could hear pets in the background, and it must have been so distracting for that person because you can't exactly get up and go and do something about it. So sort out those things beforehand. In terms of technology, sort out your Wi-Fi. If you've got any other programs open, close them. And this is a bit techie for me. I'm not the most techie, but I found that plugging my computer in to the yellow cable, which apparently is an Ethernet cable, makes it a bit stronger, apparently. Sign into the meeting platform and check everything's working beforehand. That's really important because you don't want to get there and then find out your microphone's not working. And always have a backup plan in case it doesn't work, or if your Wi-Fi goes down. So always, if you know you've got a Zoom interview, for example, load the app onto your phone so you can use your 4G or 5G, whatever you've got, to jump on it if you need to. And that's happened to me. I was doing a presentation, a national meeting about 6 months ago. I've been sat there quietly waiting. I'm tempting fate here, aren't I? On my computer, waiting and waiting, and about 5 minutes beforehand, my internet went down and I did the whole thing on my phone, and it was quite stressful. Yeah, so your mobile phone, have it ready, but make sure it's charged. Mute it and mute any notifications from any kinds of things. I've done one presentation, oh, I can't say the word, the A word, the thing that I can't say because she'll talk to me if I say it. Beware of that. And don't panic if it does go wrong. It happens all the time, and people that interview have seen it go wrong all the time. So honestly, don't worry. And if you do need to give a presentation at any time, and I don't think you do for the STP, send it in advance because that protects you as well. It's another backup. And consider using a virtual blank background so that the focus is on you and people aren't distracted by what's going on behind you. And the other thing to say is, in terms of notes, interviewers can tell when you're reading from notes. They can tell if it's not authentic and your thoughts rather than something that you've written down and scripted. And also I've heard that they may, in some interviews, generally people may ask you to show your area around you to make sure you haven't got any notes. It's not happened to me, but I have heard of it happening. Next slide. So I would say, in terms of your appearance, make the same effort as if you were going to an in-person interview. And for me as well, that really helps in terms of how I feel about myself and my confidence. You know, you might have heard about sort of power positions and poses to make you feel bigger and stronger and braver. And I've done those sometimes, but I find that dressing, you know, and actually even, it sounds a bit silly, I'm sitting in my own home, but putting on some nice smart shoes really helps as well. And sit up straight and ensure, you know, practice where you are in front of the camera. That's really important, because those kind of non-verbal cues are being watched as well, and you might not realize, but they're all being digested just as much as what you're saying. And for me, even though it's an interview and it's really difficult, I'm looking for a conversational style and some authenticity and that positive engagement from people. Because remember, your job is to stand out from all the other people. I would say in terms of questions, like Katie said, think about the STAR method, and lots of organisations use that. They certainly use it in my organisation, and I sort of teach people how to do that. And I did it myself for my interviews this year. I had a couple of those ready that I knew what to say when I was asked those kind of themed questions. Most organisations and trusts have values, so you can look those up on the website. And you may get asked questions that relate to trust values. So see what they are, think about how they relate to you. Now I'm going to test myself now. My trust values: always improving, patients first, working together. So it's really easy for me to think of examples of how that relates to me and how I put that into practice. And I would say that's a really important thing to do. But I was also think about wider aspects that it's an area of my interest. So I'm really happy we're talking about it now and having these conversations, not just about science, but about how we communicate with each other, about equality, diversity and inclusivity, and about leadership. You may get asked questions around those things. I did in at least one of my interviews this year. And there's a few examples. I got some of these tips off the internet as well. There's a few links there. Next slide. So I don't have all the answers. And when I was researching this, I went on the Science Connexions website. There's a really, really good example on there. So I would say, use the internet, go and find these great examples, because actually I don't have all the answers. I haven't applied for the STP, but this person clearly has. You know, and I would say I would really mirror what Katie said about there's a lot of people at the moment on Twitter saying, please come and talk to me if you're interested in this specialism, this specialism. So if you're on Twitter, I would absolutely do that, because people want to help you, they really do. Next slide. Now, you see the pattern of the slides has changed. So yesterday I did a STP open day at my home trust, and somebody else gave a talk about applying for the STP, and they were so good. I was so taken by what she said. I said, can I share it? And she gave me permission. And I just thought this was a really, really good slide. She was a consultant in immunology, and she said in the application, the one on the right-hand side, you can see it's very scientific. It's almost like an abstract, isn't it? But actually look at the one on the left. Isn't that easier to read? It's really clear. It tells me those other skills, how you communicate the science. So for me, and I thought, wow, I would much rather, as someone reading applications, see the one on the left rather than a list of the things you've done. And I've seen some applications where people have literally copied a job description, and don't do that because it won't make you stand out from other people. Next slide. This is a nice little slide. So proofread it before you send it. Put in paragraph breaks. I've not thought of that, but if I've got to read a load of these, I want it to sort of be really clear and really easy to read. Yeah, like she said, and error-free. Next slide. So, and this was her last slide. And I thought this was interesting. She said about what happens in the interview. You might get asked about general science, discipline-specific questions, NHS values, and management skills. And she says, smile, engage. If you don't know, just pause, take a breath, say yes, and then think of your answer. It's fine to have pauses and silence while you think for a few seconds. And it's definitely worth looking at the NHS Constitution and your trust values. So I just wanted to say thank you to Alison there, because she gave me permission to share her slides. Next. So people often ask what makes a successful candidate. And there's no right answer to that. There's a whole range of people, to be honest. And they're people that know what healthcare science is and a healthcare scientist is. But what we're really looking for are the leaders of the future. So we want people that can do the science and the job, but what we're looking for is, what are you going to innovate on? What are you going to bring to the profession in the future? That's what I'm really looking for. I'm looking for enthusiasm, authenticity. I'm not looking for a list of the things you've done. Volunteering, it's a tricky one at the moment. It's a really tricky one. It's not a do or die thing. It's a good thing, but I know how hard it is. And people interviewing and doing applications know how hard it is for everybody at the moment. It's really good to know about the values and constitution, and also some strategy. Have a look at the NHS People Plan. It's a really good place to start. If you're applying to pathology, have a look at the pathology networks, the NHS England and Improvement Pathology Networks. Look at the professional bodies for the specialisms and use social media. There's lots of stuff out there at the moment. Next slide. So just to let you know, in 2019, I like this pie chart, about 70% of the people that completed the programme are working as a clinical scientist in the NHS. 2020, it's 68%, but it wasn't in a pie chart, so I thought I'd put this one in. Next slide. Top 5 factors for the people applying. They want to work in the NHS, they want to be registered as a clinical scientist, they want to do healthcare science, they think it's an interesting and variable career. It's a really high quality training programme that's really well supported. You know, compared to lots of other professions, it's a fantastic opportunity. Next slide. And then I think this is my last slide. And basically, this is just a summary of all the wealth of brilliant information that is on the National School website. So the majority of your questions, you can find the answer to on the website. So there's a link there. Thanks very much. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, good luck.
Thank you so much, Jo. That was really informative, even for myself, who's not applying for the programme. So thank you so much. So we're going to move on to the Q&A session now. And we do have a few questions in the chat and a few questions off the chat as well. So I'll start with the questions in the chat. So the first question, which I think you partially answered already, the question was, how do you show your ability to meet the physical requirements in the written application? And this, you can answer, Jo, and Katie, you can answer if you have any additions as well.
It's on the person specification on the National School website.
Yeah. So, Katie, do you have?
I was going to say the same. It's in the specification, and I'd say think about the physical skills that you would have to do in the discipline that you're applying to, and think about how you can demonstrate them using your past experiences if you have them.
Yeah, and I'll just add, even just applying to any job, as Jo mentioned, you use the personal specification. And what I tend to do is I try to think of at least 2 or 3 examples. I'd say 2, stick with 2, and try and think of 2 examples so that you can kind of give a robust answer in your application, so that you're showing, you're not just saying that you have this experience or this skill, but you've put it into practice as well. So just try and maybe think of 2 instances where you've actually practiced those particular skills that are documented in the personal specification. All right, so sorry, Liz, Elizabeth, do you have anything you wanted to add? No? All right, that's fine. The second question, this is from Hanin. Sorry, the first question was from Catherine, but this question is from Hanin. For the care experience, would a role as a national support line volunteer be okay, as I've tried to get other more caring roles? I've tried to get other more caring roles. However, due to COVID, I was never accepted for anything. So this Hanin has a role as a national support line volunteer. So would that be okay to put down?
That's fantastic. I think it's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure that there are some skills that you have from this role that can be transferred to, you know, a clinical scientist role. And I think it's just about just honing in on those particular skills. I'm not too sure what this role involves. However, you know, the fact I'm sure it's probably in it's in a hospital. If it is, then you have experience with dealing with people, you know, in a hospital environment. So you can definitely try and just beef up that the experience that you have there. So yeah. This is another question from, please forgive me, I might not pronounce this properly, Pruistine. And the first question she has is, does the STP accept international students? They are currently studying in Bristol and eligible for a graduate visa. But the graduate visa is only for 2 years, and the STP program is for 3 years. So would this work out?
So I saw this in the chat and I've just done a bit of searching because I'm like, oh gosh. So that it says, are international applicants eligible to apply for STP? Yes, we welcome all applications. It says, I am from outside of the UK. Do I have the right to work in the UK? It says, before you start your application, visit the UK Visas and Immigration Service to check your eligibility. If you require a skilled worker visa to work and train in the UK as a healthcare scientist, visit the Home Office website for the latest guidance. There's a points-based system. And what I've done is I've put a link to the page I'm reading from, which has some more sort of detail on. And what I would advise them to do is, if those aren't the right people to contact for their question, contact the school, because they will have much more knowledge about this and be asked this question all of the time, and they're really happy to help people to answer any questions.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Jo. If you do you have the link for the information?
I put it in the chat.
Thank you, that's what I was going to ask. Yeah, brilliant, thank you so much. We have a question here for Elizabeth. What do you do in your day-to-day routine as a clinical pharmaceutical quality practitioner? You also mentioned that you had the opportunity to attend conferences during the STP. What did you get to do in the conferences?
Thank you for your question. Day to day, it looks very different. So sometimes I can be in the actual unit, so the clean room where we make drugs, and I can be involved in manufacturing drugs for the hospital. Or I can be involved with the process of checking the drug once it's been manufactured. Or if I'm in radiopharmacy, I could be dealing with radioactive substances that are used as diagnostic tools or treatment, or I could be seeing a patient in nuclear medicine in regards to giving them advice with the treatment and diagnosis tool they may be receiving. I could be in production making creams and ointments, or yeah, I could also be in QC, working in a lab and working on formulations to make them more suitable for patients, and doing a bit of research as well. So day to day basically looks really, really different. As a trainee, currently I specialize in QA, where I focus mainly on legislations and new laws coming out in regards to drug manufacturing, and a lot of paperwork, to be honest. So making sure worksheets and things that we use related to drugs are of good quality for the patient, and also releasing products as well. So seeing that they're fit for use, looking at the chemistry of the product and looking at the process and how it's been made, and then releasing it to be used for a patient maybe getting treated for cancer, or yeah, many various things. I just, yeah, it's basically there's loads, I'm just selling that specialism a lot. There's loads and loads and loads of things to do. The second question, sorry, I've already forgotten it.
The second part was your attendance to conferences. What did you get to do at the conferences?
Yeah, so if I'm honest, mainly eat and sit down and watch people talk. So these conferences were really useful because people are bringing ideas that they do in their trust to the table and saying, this is how we do things. New laws and how we can adapt them within our trust were being presented. And a lot of networking, they left time specifically for you to get to know other people. I'm quite young, so it can be quite intimidating speaking to people that are more experienced than you, but people are very welcoming, so that was really lovely. Also have the opportunity to present your master's project, for example. I was meant to present my own master's project at one of these conferences, but I got pregnant. So I wasn't able to do it because I was on maternity leave. But I have seen other STP students or other professionals present their work, and you would listen and you could ask questions and you can bring back that information back to your base. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Elizabeth. That was very insightful. Yeah, thank you. I was just going to ask, maybe Katie, you could possibly share as well what your typical day looks like. I think you briefly went through it during your presentation, but as we've had some people join us a bit later, maybe you can just possibly share.
Yeah, sure. So I'm still training to be a clinical biochemist. So some of the stuff that I'm doing at the moment is shadowing and learning from the clinical scientists. So an example of what a clinical biochemist would do is they might be on shift as the duty biochemist, which is when they look at the results generated from the lab, and the computer kind of filters through the results, and if there's any abnormal ones or any ones that need looking at, they'll go to the duty biochemist, and the biochemist will look at them and think, do I need to phone a doctor? Is the result above or below what we call an action limit? So that's when it needs phoning, to let the doctor or the clinician who's with the patient let them know that this is an urgent result that needs dealing with. And they will deal with queries from people elsewhere in the hospital over the phone, and kind of be the person that anybody in the lab goes to if they have any issues. And clinical scientists will get results from specialised tests in the lab and go through them and interpret them and think, what does this mean for the patient, and what do these results mean? Who do I have to contact about these? So I've been kind of learning how to do those. There are a lot of different aspects to it, and learning how those results generated in the first place. So doing the techniques, learning how the analyzers work, because it's a very automated discipline, but there are some semi-automated and more manual techniques to learn as well. So I've been really enjoying kind of learning how those work and giving them a go. Yeah, I think I've waffled on, sorry.
No, that was great. Thank you, Katie. We have a question. I can't see the name, but it says, can you be a biomedical scientist and a clinical scientist registered at the same time?
You're looking at one.
Oh.
I'm dual registered.
So that answers the question. Yes, you can. Okay, brilliant. So we'll move on to the next question then. So this is from Anissa, and the question is, should we be more worried about the application writing or the situation judgment test or the interview? And the second part is, at what stage in the process have people been unsuccessful in the past? think this is for all of you, or maybe possibly.
So I could say, I would say interview is probably, if you've got that far, you've got a pretty good chance, I would say, although it's not a guarantee. I would say application is the really key bit, because that's where you're getting scored with your SJT. At the start, the SJT you can practice to some extent. The application, I think if it was me, I was thinking, what would I be most worried about? I'd be most worried about the application, I think. What about you, Katie and Elizabeth, having been through it?
I'd agree with you that if you have an interview, that's a very good sign, but obviously you still have to perform well in that. I'd say don't be worried in general. It is a stressful time, but try not to worry. Well, I think overall, basically, you have to do well in all of them, to be blunt. But yeah, the application is heavy. It will require a lot of work and take a lot of time. So I guess I'd agree with Joe. Yeah, but I think you just need to do well in all of them, really. Sorry, that's a really bad answer, probably.
No, I think it's actually a really good answer. That just try and do your best in every area, and yeah, don't worry, because all you can do is do your best. Yeah, and I can see Elizabeth nodding. Do you want to add anything, or?
No, I totally agree. That is, yeah, you should try not to worry. I guess with the application, you can plan ahead. You can and give yourself enough time to go through it. But I will say I did find the interviews intimidating. It is not a normal process, and I appreciate how you can be concerned about the fact that you've been interviewed basically 5 times, but it's the beauty of being interviewed. Basically, is it 5 or 4? I can't remember. But you're being interviewed multiple times, so you can come as a new person for each station, but oh, shake that off, come back again, you know. And by the end of it, well, personally, I was just like, okay, let's just do this. Let's just feel comfortable and be ourselves. So I think in each aspect that there's pros and cons. I feel like that's my favorite word today, pros and cons. But don't worry and just make use of the advantages to each process and work with it. It should be hopefully okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We have a question from Sarah, and it says, do you have any tips on how to fit the reflective pieces relating to the personal spec into 500 words whilst giving an in-depth answer? Shall I read it again? Or okay, go ahead.
Is that okay? I'd probably say I found this the hardest part of the application was the word count. It's very tight. And I'm the type of person, I've always been the type of person with essays, everything, I just write loads and then I go back at the end and cut it down. Obviously, everybody works differently. That's how I work. So you just have to be brutal. You have to think, say you write a paragraph. So, right, what do I actually need in this paragraph? What bit of this paragraph has actually showed that I'm good for this role? What bit of this paragraph has matched the specification? Don't worry about making it sound fancy. Like, don't worry about making it sound like, I don't know what the word is, but just be concise, because you need to show that you fit the specification, not that you know loads of fancy words that aren't related to the aspects that you need to portray. So it is really difficult, and I do appreciate that, but just be brutal. And also, if you can get a friend to have a look at it, they might say, oh, you don't need those 5 words, they don't add anything there. So yeah, just try and stick to the specification, but you don't have to tick every single thing off the specification. Don't think you have to do that. It's better to focus on the few that you can really show and give an example of how you've demonstrated that, rather than just giving a bit of a waffly answer about everything. I hope that helps. Yeah, but it's difficult.
Thanks, Katie. Jo, Elizabeth, do you have anything you want to add?
I use the same technique in that for applications and also for writing articles. I write loads. I don't try and make it perfect. I just put down what I'm thinking, what I say, and then I hack it to death. And I have the same rule of, does this add value? If it doesn't add value, get rid of it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jo. Thank you. And we have another question from Lauren. As you progress up the career ladder, what is the difference between a consultant and a principal clinical scientist?
I actually just looked this up because I was like, ooh, I don't know. So I think, and I might be wrong, but so a consultant scientist, so I'm a consultant scientist and I've achieved that because I've got a college, Royal College qualification that enables me to report specimens within my practice. So that's what makes me a consultant. I would say a principal clinical scientist is somebody who's leading a service, and they may also be a consultant. So I would say, you know, there might be a number of consultants and then there'd be a principal who leads it. And that's how I would interpret it. I don't know if the other ladies agree with me. I may not be right, but I think.
Oh, I thought, okay, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I actually don't know, but it feels, and it's not science answer question, but it feels right. So I feel like, yeah. And you've done the research, you know, enough evidence to back it.
Brilliant. I personally don't know either, but I'm not a scientist, so. Okay, no, that's great. Thank you, Jo and Elizabeth. So we have another question. During the application process, what are the typical transferable skills that a student can use if they weren't able to get some experience?
Communication, leadership, kindness, compassion, supporting others, caring for others. If you care for a relative, it's still caring. Attention to detail.
Brilliant. That was brilliant. Thanks, Jo. Katie, Elizabeth, anything? Yeah.
I'd agree with everything that Jo said. Yeah, communication is a big one. If you've had any experience in your life of like teaching others or you know, communicating your knowledge to others or your skills, that's always a good one as well. But yeah, everything Jo said.
I totally agree, because I applied with no placement year and straight out of university. So if you're part of, goodness, I feel old, I can't remember what these things are called. Clubs, I want to call them clubs, but they're not called clubs, they're called bigger things when you get to university. But if you're part of societies, there you go. So if you're part of societies, there are skills that you can show there if you're a treasurer, or personally, I was part of a gospel choir. So showing compassion there was helping people with their confidence, and yeah, or you're doing a dissertation and a project and you're working part of a team, or you're just showing that you actually have some analytical skills. That's good. But yeah, I think maybe it's good to maybe do like a mind map and just put out all the things that you do, your hobbies, your interests, and you realize you're not as, well, I'm not as blind as I thought I was when I put it down on paper and tried to make it into something. So yeah, there's definitely something unique about you, and you don't necessarily need to do a placement year to achieve that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Another question, is a placement year a plus point? So would you have, so if you were to have a placement year, would that give you an edge?
Difficult one to answer. It doesn't immediately go, well, I'll tell you what I honestly think is that it wouldn't automatically, because I would be thinking, has another person who hasn't had that had the same opportunity? If I'm being absolutely honest, that's how I would look at it. So it wouldn't, in my mind, it wouldn't automatically. because I'm looking for more than that. I'm not just looking for a collection of things that you've done. Does that make sense? I'm looking for a kind of a more holistic view of someone and what they can do in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was beautifully said, Jo. We do have another question, and this will be the last question. Is there a structure to the interviews now that, sorry, let me read this out again. Yeah, so is there a structure to the interviews now that it is down to the place of work to carry out the interview? Now that it's down to, because I know that before, I think there was probably, as Elizabeth said, there were like different interviews for different areas, but now it's just the workplace. So is there a particular structure that's followed?
So I can only talk about, you know, plans in the trust I work in. So we would follow a similar structure to any other interview, in that, like the slide I showed from Alison, there would be some questions, some general questions, some scientific questions. I think she said maybe a management and then something else. So go back to that slide and see, but it would be, it would definitely, you know, be like Katie said, sort of staff story and kind of trust value related, I think. And I imagine lots of employers would be the same, because at the end of the day, there'll be an NHS employee in your organisation. So it would have to have a similar pattern to any interview. Yeah, I don't know how else to answer that. I haven't done it yet. So I've never been involved in interviews until this year.
Sorry, I was talking while on mute. I don't like doing that. But yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much, Jo. That was really, yeah, really informative. So I think we are, okay, we have one more question that's come, and this will be the last one. From the previous applicants that you have had, was there anything that made them stand out instantly? You haven't had an have you? Yep.
Yeah, but for this, I haven't had a previous applicant because it's my first time of doing interviews. But you know, I've interviewed lots of people over the years, and I've shortlisted for loads of general interviews. I think it's never just one person doing it. So it's always a group of people, and people are individuals, and they always see different things, and they're looking for different things. I am absolutely, like I said, I'm not looking for a list of achievements. I'm looking at a more holistic view. So I always draw on my personal areas of interest. I'm interested in compassion, to show that you care about people and potentially patients, because that's who you're working for. And I'm looking for authenticity. So I can tell from an application when it's generic and it's been used in the 20 previous ones. I'm looking for something that absolutely, I know the person firstly knows about the subject, and not in detail, but what I mean is they know what healthcare science is and how you apply it to patient care. That's what I'm interested in, that they've thought about it. And I'm interested that they've sort of kind of got an authentic type approach to it. So it's really personal, and they've really taken the time to look at the job description and the person's specification to see, okay, what's the person that's going to interview me want from me? And those things are the things that make people stand out. And it's the opposite, really. It's when people don't do that, it makes them, whatever the opposite is to stand out, stand in. So actually, that's the first thing to do. And then, because I want to remember, I want to think, that person's really good. And the other thing is, like Alison's other slide, is it was so concise, and it didn't just list, you know, that sort of abstract of all the science they'd done and that sort of, but what it did was it showed how they communicated it. So it was like the theory, but they'd turned it into the practice and how they'd applied it. So that's what I'm really interested in. And that's a general answer, not an STP answer particularly.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jo, and thank you so much to our speakers as well. We've reached the end of this lovely event. I've really enjoyed it, and I've actually learnt. I've been working for what, over 10 years now. I feel old, but yeah, I gained some wisdom nuggets from you guys. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Tolu, and she's just going to kind of do our outro for us and just share what, how you can keep in touch and, where you can get our information.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so thank you so much for attending. Thank you for making it this far. Thank you to our speakers. If you want to get in touch with us at Life Science Connections, we have a number of ways. We are on Facebook at Life Science Connections. We are on Instagram, also at Life Science Connections. LinkedIn as well, that's the main place where we post, as well as the Instagram. We post there, we post our blogs that Aderonke mentioned before. We've got the STP blog as well on our website, which Jo referenced before. If you want to sort of carry on your learning or look at what else you can do, please do head over to that. We're also on Twitter. And also, most importantly, if you do have any questions for us, maybe you think of something afterwards, or maybe you want to get more information, please do feel free to email us on our email address. And also, just to mention as well, Karima, who is one of our who works with us at Life Science Connection, she had did her STP in the clinical embryology. So she did that. So if anyone is particularly interested in that and has a question for her, please do email us at info@lifescienceconnections.co.uk if you have any questions or any insights that you want to gain from her. So without much more to say, I hope you all have an amazing evening, amazing weekend, and all the best for those who are going to be applying this year. If you do end up getting on there, it would be good to hear any testimonials from you, and just keep in touch with us as well.
All right, thank you.